Welcome, everybody, to Inside Boxing Weekly Live on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. Inside Boxing Weekly Live is brought to you by the Retired Boxers Foundation and MyBookie.ag. I'm your host, Mike Goodpaster. Right now, I want to welcome in my co-host. First up, Jeremiah Preisser. How you doing, Jeremiah?
I am doing really, really well. Always excited to be on after a night of fights. Let's talk some boxing, guys.
All right, and of course, my next co-host, John Einreinhofer. How you doing, John?
Good, Mike. As Jeremiah said, good to be talking about things right after they occurred here tonight. So anxious to do the recap.
And it was a decent fight card. There were some entertaining fights. Errol Spence stops at the start of the 8th round. Lamont Peterson. The thing that stuck out to me, John, was the fact that for some reason Lamont Peterson just stood in front of him.
Yeah, Mike, I agree, but I think to me that is Lamont Peterson, and that's one of the things that I thought going into the fight why he had no chance against someone as good as Errol Spence, because Lamont Peterson is not really the type of boxer that moves around the ring a lot. He's a guy who, even at 140 pounds, was not a puncher, and while he has boxing skill, he always has done a lot of coming forward, a lot of fighting on the inside, so I just didn't think he had any kind of package to give Errol Spence any boxing trouble, and that's what we saw. And I think then not only was he, because it's not really in his game, was he able to move around the ring, but then I thought what we saw even more was he was in basically a defensive shell because he couldn't stand in front of Errol Spence or do his normal inside game trying to push him back and throw punches inside because he was just going to take too much heavy artillery in return. So I thought that put him in a bit of a shell. And I thought that's what he did in the early rounds against Danny Garcia as well. But Danny Garcia is nowhere near as good as Errol Spence and does not let his hands go at near the rate of Errol Spence. So in that fight, Lamont Peterson was able to withstand those early rounds of inactivity and come on in the second fight against Garcia, where against Spence, he just took a vicious beating during that part of the fight, and the tank was empty by the time we got to the second half of the fight.
Yeah, and I was impressed with Spence tonight, Jeremiah. What was your take?
Yeah, I was impressed as well. I mean, there's not a whole lot to dislike about the guy's style. I mean, he comes forward. He's got good power. He's got a good work rate. His accuracy is pretty good. I mean, there's diversity in his punches. I was actually quite fond of, I know a lot of people are big on his body punching, and I'm a fan of any guy who learns how to stick to the body as well. But I liked his uppercut. It's not often that you see a good southpaw with a nice uppercut. Zab Judah was one. But there aren't many that come to mind when you think of that. But in regards to Lamont Peterson, I want to say that I thought he did box pretty well in the early going against Danny Garcia. He did move a bit more consistently, and I thought he would do that here. But I don't know. I don't know. I don't think he had as many options. I don't think he had many options because even if he moved, eventually Spence was going to track him down and bang him out regardless. But, I thought that he could be a bit more versatile in his approach. Against Amir Khan, against Danny Garcia, he showed a little bit more than what I thought he showed against Spence. And I don't know if that was his plan from the get-go to, out-muscle Spence. Peterson is a strong guy. But, like John said, he's never been a big puncher, not even at 140 pounds. So it was just one of those things where maybe that's how he felt he had to approach the fight, and that was all that he could do. But in regards to Spence, it was a good performance. He did what he had to do. Again, his work rate was good, his power was good, the body punching was good. He seemed to take Lamont Peterson's punches fine. And again, I know Lamont Peterson is not a big puncher, but I liked how he reacted to the punches. So whenever he took, I'm trying to think of what round it was, but he took a nice, clean, crisp right hand from Lamont Peterson, and he just shook it off and kept coming forward. That's what you want to see in a person, in a person like him. You want to see it in his mentality. That's the kind of stuff that made guys like Marco Antonio Barrera great, right? He had his when he had his 3-fight series with Eric Morales. He'd take shots and immediately he would throw something back. So I like what I saw there. And I like what I saw in the post-fight interview.
Yeah, and when I saw the fight, To me, the most impressive man on the night, this not to take anything away from Spence, was Barry Hunter and the way Barry Hunter stopped that fight. Because how many times, Jeremiah, do we see boxers in the same situation with trainers that supposedly care about them that will just keep sending them out there to get their brains scrambled round after round?
Yeah, and I think even for, the guys who do care, sometimes I think it's a conundrum for them because, they're putting a rock in a hard place with some of these guys because, in your heart, I'm sure you want to take them out, but you also want to let them fight on if they believe they can do so. But no, it was absolutely the right call. I hopped on social media for a second to see what was going on afterwards, and everybody seemed to agree with it. I mean, I was right there with Barry Hunter. I mean, he protected his guy. Lamont Peterson, he's a brave guy. He's a tough guy, and he would have fought on. I think there was even an exchange in the corner in a couple rounds before that where, he asked him if he wanted to pull him out, and Peterson was like, me, So Hunter, he assessed the situation correctly. He left a little bit more tread on Lamont Peterson's tires. Good call. I think you guys agree with that as well.
Yeah, and John, the thing that struck me coming into this fight, and I said it on the Pick'em show, I actually thought Peterson would make it 12 rounds, which is why I was impressed with Spence getting him out of there. But I think you're looking at a 34-year-old guy that's had basically one fight in 2.5 or 3 years, moving up and fighting the first welterweight he'd faced. He was in over his head from the get-go, I think. He's a really good fighter. But I think his time has come and gone, and I really, after the beating he took, I know he could probably still beat some guys in the bottom of the top 10, but hopefully Peterson retires after this.
Well, Peterson did fight Avanesian, but, this particular fight did play out almost exactly the way I figured it would play out. I just didn't think Lamont Peterson had anything for Errol Spence, and Errol Spence is a guy that takes care of business, and that's something I always really like to see in a fighter. And even though these three fighters' styles are completely different and their ages are different, I'm thinking when I see Spence tonight, I'm thinking of Golovkin, who, when he wants to, has a good variety of punches. He can go to the body, he can jab, he has power. He knocked out 19 straight. Jared Hurd, of course, a newer guy on the scene who comes to take you out, has a good variety of punches. He's aggressive. He's knocked out 7 straight guys. Errol Spence, a southpaw who has power and can go to the body and has boxing skills and is not afraid to get aggressive. He's knocked out 10 straight. What I'm saying here is this is not a coincidence. These are the kind of fighters who really ascend to the top of the sport, especially nowadays when you don't see it as much in past eras. These are guys not content to have the unimpressive decision where, they didn't look that good or they looked lethargic, and then they make excuses for, letting the lesser guy go the distance and that type of stuff. And that's why I think that these guys are as dangerous as they are, and fans want to see these guys fight. And I think it almost needs to be talked about more because they really deserve credit for that, because not only do they win, they take care of business in a manner that makes the fans want to see them again and asserts their dominance and their place in the sport. And, that's I think that's overall, that's good for the sport. Instead of a guy who's just content to go a boring decision against a lesser opponent and maybe not be as prepared and just say, well, I got the win and I move on to the next time. Well, the fans don't want to see that. So Spence is a guy you want to see fight. And, tonight I thought was exactly what he should do against somebody like Lamont Peterson. It was nothing less. He took care of business, and he's right where he should be. I think he's the best welterweight in the world. Remember, Lamont Peterson's only been stopped once by Matisse. It was early, but that was the only time he's been stopped. Algieri was stopped for the first time by Spence. Bundu was stopped by the first time by Spence, and Bundu went the distance with Thurman. Brook was beaten by the first time as a welterweight by Spence, and he was stopped. So to me, the signs are all there of what Errol Spence is. He's already arrived, but I think he's a guy who's arrived that's still got some room to get better. But I think that some people confuse that he's not there yet or something. He's there, He's going to beat any welterweight in the world to me, including Terrence Crawford. That's a promotional thing that we're not going to see that unless it's a mega fight, because it'd have to be some sort of cross-TV thing. But they're still in the same division and it's still the same sport, so we can at least think about it. But he's the guy for me in the welterweight division, which still has a lot of great fighters like Terrence Crawford, Keith Thurman. So it's an exciting division. But what I'd like to see from Errol Spence is, I want to see him get 3 fights in this year. I don't think he can expect Thurman in the summer, even though they've got the same TV connections, management connections. I do think, though, it's realistic to expect Thurman by the end of the year. So, again, I said this on our show earlier this week. If Andy Garcia is going to fight Brandon Rios, and to me it wouldn't matter if he looked good or not look good, but especially maybe if he doesn't look that great. In other words, what's really the risk for Errol Spence to get in with Danny Garcia in the summer? They ought to pay Danny Garcia what he needs, get that fight for Errol Spence, and let him move with even bigger momentum into the Thurman fight. That's what I'd really like to see, and have a clear fighter of the year type of year. I think it'd be good for the sport with a guy with Errol Spence's talent doing that.
Yeah, but I would rather see Errol Spence against Sean Porter, somebody that's at least going to come to fight him.
I would be okay with that too. I'm assuming, and maybe I'm assuming wrong, but why I didn't mention Porter instead of Garcia, I agree. I think Porter is the tougher opponent at this point, but I just think Sean Porter, I'm sensing, maybe I'm wrong, that he's already been in there, with Thurman in a tough fight on national TV. He had faced Brook earlier, even though that was a sloppy fight. That wasn't a fight with a lot of damage, wasn't an appealing fight. But since he's been in some tough fights already. Lost some close decisions that maybe he just doesn't want Errol Spence at that point. That's an assumption I'm making, but I think that's an educated guess on my part, that it seems to me that Sean Porter is looking for something else at this stage of his career. He's a high contact fighter. He's looked a little more sloppy even against the lesser opponents, Granado and Berto, in recent bouts. And I think the fighters do know themselves deep down a lot of times. And I wouldn't think maybe at this stage that Porter wants to get in there with Errol Spence, but I would agree that would be better than Garcia, but I'm just assuming that maybe Sean Porter's not going to want that. Not that Danny Garcia does either, but it seems to me that Sean Porter is looking for something else right now.
Yeah, and of course, John, if he's going to prove himself an all-time great, he is going to have to fight against Andre Berto at some point.
Yeah, let's hope Andre Berto stays in retirement now, I hope.
He can fight Andre Berto and then Robert Guerrero.
We've already got Devin Alexander and
Victor Ortiz
coming up against Victor Ortiz. So, that's a catch-22, because as I've seen time go on, I thought, the one thing I got to give Al Heyman, because I think it can go both ways, and he looks at it in this way, and I could kind of see that, is if the fighter themselves really wants to continue the fight, and let's face it, there's these guys, even with whatever they are making when they're in the downside of their career, they're not going to make that money somewhere else, even though we know boxing is not necessarily good for your health. So he keeps giving them a chance as long as they want to fight. In the past, you remember somebody like a Duvas with main events, and I liked main events back then, but they would make a big show of like letting a guy go when a guy picked up a couple losses, like we're worried about his health. And the guy would end up fighting anyway then with somebody else. And I'm thinking, were they really that worried about his health, or was it at the point where he wasn't going to make him enough money anymore and they wanted to work with somebody else? So, I can see Al Heyman's side of the argument there for some of these guys continuing to go on.
All right, Jeremiah, is he the best welterweight in the world right now?
The funny thing is, I was going to ask, because we know John ranks Spence as the number one guy, and I was going to ask you if you rated Spence the number one guy, but since I'm in the hot seat, I'm going to say that no, I don't think Spence is the number one guy right now. I don't think a win over Lamont Peterson should have him hopscotch Keith Thurman yet. I want to see how Keith Thurman's fight early this year transpires, and then I just want to see a little bit more out of Spence. We look at Boondu and we look at Algieri and we look at Peterson, but really it's Kell Brook when you boil it down. And I don't want to make too much about the win. I mean, it was a good win. Peterson is a good fighter, but I don't want to make it seem as if he was beating a top 10 guy. So right now, I don't think he should be ranked number one. Is he the best welterweight in the world? Probably, but I don't know. He's got to fight better opposition for me to be convinced. The thing about Spence is, even though I like what I see, there's still some things that cast doubt on him being some potential great. I mean, he's a good puncher, but I don't even think he hits harder than Lucas Matisse punch for punch. He's got good hand speed, but he doesn't have great hand speed. He's a good body puncher. I don't know. Is he a great body puncher? I don't know. So for me, he's still got to take on the very best. I really want to see the Keith Thurman fight, and I want that to be, granted they both get past whoever they may, and they fight later this year. That's going to decide who the best welterweight is. But then again, it might be Terrence Crawford. I don't know. They've got to fight so I can know.
Yeah, because right now, John, I don't think we can know, but I think that Thurman number one, and then Crawford and Spence at number two to me, just because I haven't really seen Crawford fight at welterweight because he hasn't. So I'm not just going to judge him off what he did in a lower weight class. But Thurman has to be number one right now, just from the fighters he's beaten compared to everybody else.
No, I don't think so. I think that, so we're looking at Thurman. So he's got a decision over Danny Garcia. Never had Garcia in any trouble or dropped him or anything like that. Same kind of decision against Sean Porter in a very close fight. Yeah, two good fighters. So Errol Spence stopped Kell Brook, who beat Sean Porter. Errol Spence stopped Bundu, who Thurman dropped and then danced away from over the rest of the course of the fight. Didn't even put any more hurt on him. Let Bundu pursue him. Algieri never been stopped before. Spence stopped him. Thurman had an earlier win over Diego Chavez. You saw what Jamal James just did to him. I just think that the evidence is all there. I don't think there is any doubt anymore. Spence, to me, I already had him there, but Spence is the number one guy. Let's do the odds maker test. Anybody think Keith Thurman's going to be favored over Errol Spence? I don't think that there's any chance of that.
No, because Spence is more popular, and they want even money.
No, Mike, it's because they have to account for the smart money as well, not just the money that bets on popularity, because that's the dumb money. Now, that's out there, but they have to account for smart money, too, and it balances itself out in the end. And, Errol Spence is going to be the favorite over Keith Thurman. I would say Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford, the odds makers on that one, boy, that might be a straight even money. I mean, I think Spence would win that fight. That might even be. I like Thurman, but I think it might be a little tighter even. But again, Spence has got. It doesn't all come down to size, like people say, but size is a factor. Errol Spence has a size advantage over Terrence Crawford and Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman's just not punching with the authority he was earlier in his career against lesser opposition, and I think you've got to look at that as a factor. And Errol Spence, Keith Thurman showed he can box, was a better boxer than we might have thought earlier in his career. And his boxing has been good in fights against, Porter and Garcia. But, Thurman couldn't stop Robert Guerrero. The signs are all there. I mean, Guerrero ended up getting blasted out by Omar Figueroa. I just don't think that, I think that it would have even looked closer, last year. But as time's coming when this fight's going to be coming up, let's say it would be at the end of this year, unless Keith Thurman blows out Jesse Vargas or something like that. Vargas has never been stopped. That might catch your eye. But see, that's the type of thing Spence is doing that you've got to do to catch people's eye like that. And Keith Thurman's not heading in that direction. He's fighting well. He's getting wins. He's a number two guy to me. I've got him ahead of Crawford at welterweight at this point, as good as Terrence Crawford is. But I think that this is all moving in Errol Spence's direction. And as long as he's going to make that welterweight limit, I think he's going to be the guy there.
All right, Jeremiah.
Well, I mean, it does sort of depend on how Keith Thurman does against Jesse Vargas. But I mean, if Thurman takes Jesse Vargas's scalp, Vargas is a guy who's been ranked in the top 10 before, and he's also a guy who's been competitive against good fighters. But if he beats Jesse Vargas, is that a better win than Lamont Peterson? I mean, of course, it kind of depends on how it goes, but you'd then have Jesse Vargas. You'd have Sean Porter, you'd have Danny Garcia, both of which were, top 5 guys, if I'm not mistaken. And then you'd have Diego Chavez, who was good, but I mean, the stoppage by Jamal James is, years after the fact. And
Chavez was a guy Thurman beat in 2013 when Chavez, I think, was 22-0. There's a big difference between beating him now and beating him then.
What's the big difference?
4 years,
what
3
beating,
years?
What beating did he take or anything in the interim?
Okay. So guys usually get better as they get older.
Well, it depends on what stage you are. He wasn't at any stage where he'd take any significant beatings or losses.
He lost to Brandon Rios. He lost the split decision.
A fight that he was about
Bradley.
to take. A fight that he was about to take Rios out in when Rios was looking to get out of there. So that certainly wasn't a particular mark against him. That was a DQ that shouldn't have been a DQ.
Well, in 2016, he fought nobody. In 2015, he literally fought nobody because he didn't fight. So after he lost to Thurman, he had to fight with Rios and Bradley in 2014. He didn't fight anybody of any note again until he fought James 3 years later. So you can't tell me that he's going to be just as good.
He had a draw with Tim Bradley.
I know. That's why I just said Bradley. I said since the fight against Bradley in 2014. It'd been 3 years. He'd beaten Juan Carlos Prada, who was 32-5, and he beat Luis Zarate, who was 21-3, and he beat Jorge Miranda, who was 55-19. Those were his 3 fights over those 3 years.
And he had a draw with Bradley.
Yeah, what's your point? In 2014. So obviously between 14 and 17, he didn't fight anybody, and he definitely didn't get better.
He didn't necessarily get any worse either, and he had a draw with Bradley. And again, you got Errol Spence.
How can you not get worse if you're not fighting?
You have Errol Spence took out Kell Brook, who was ranked at the top of the welterweight, very near the top of the welterweight division by anybody. Everybody had never lost as a welterweight, and he took him out. That's the kind of knockout that Keith Thurman hasn't been scoring in recent years, and that's the type of signs that are all there to me that Spence is the number one guy at this point.
Jeremiah.
Well, I suppose we'll see later on this year. Well, at least we'll hope to do so. But we also got to admit, and it is true that Kell Brook never lost as a welterweight, but it's also true that he got beat up and bruised by Golovkin beforehand. So we've got to equate that into the factor too. But it's a matter of them fighting. I mean, I do agree that Spence has been more impressive in his performances, but I also think that Keith Thurman has fought in the better opposition. And I don't for me, a win over Danny Garcia, and I thought that was a clear win. And I think that he didn't have Danny Garcia in real big trouble in those fights, but he certainly you certainly saw that Danny Garcia was feeling the impact of those punches, which I think is part of the reason why Danny Garcia wasn't throwing as much as he could. I also thought Keith Thurman beat Sean Porter clearer than Kell Brook did, and I also thought he was more exciting in doing so. So I think the weight of beating Sean Porter and Danny Garcia, I think that's better than a win over Kell Brook, who, again, it was a good win. The one win over Sean Porter was a good win, and I got to give Kell Brook credit. And I do think he was a talented guy. But we also got to understand that Kell Brook really didn't have much of an impressive resume prior to that either. I mean, he took on a lot of defenses like Jojo Dan, Kevin Bizier.
Frankie Gavin.
Frankie Gavin, who, funny enough, I'll be interviewing here soon. His manager approached me today and asked if I want to do it. And I'm like, all right, okay. That works. But, I mean, when it's all said and done, and unfortunately, there's those promotional issues with Terrence Crawford. They've got to fight the fights. And to Spence's credit, he called Keith Thurman out after this. He said, he's making excuses, though I don't think his arm injury is an excuse. But Keith Thurman isn't talking like he used to. There was a time when Keith Thurman was like, hey, I'll take the L. My 0 doesn't mean anything to me. And I don't know if he's just been taking too much vacation time in Nepal or what, getting married, hanging out. But he's not talking as tough as he used to. But the point is, they've got to fight the fights. I mean, we're never going to know unless they actually do so. And because PBC has both of the guys, eventually we're going to get the fight. So I'm hoping that instead of getting a Sean Porter, Keith Thurman rematch later this year, because I really don't need to see that again. I don't know if you guys need to. I don't need to see that fight again. If he goes ahead and beats Jesse Vargas, which everybody expects him to, Keith Thurman is really where it should be at later this year.
Yeah, and I think Spence would beat Thurman from what I've seen right now. We're talking about who deserves to be ranked a little bit higher. Spence has to beat him, and I think that I want to see Terrence Crawford and Jeff Horn. I want to see if Crawford can fight at welterweight, because I think all around Crawford's a better fighter.
Well, I think Crawford's going to massacre Jeff Horn, so to me that doesn't mean much. I just think that, with
so you don't think Jeff Horn is even a top 10 welterweight?
No, I think
you had him ranked at 7.
Right, he got the official decision.
Well, you had him ranked at 7 now. If you don't think he's in the top 10, why'd you rank him at 7?
I'm ranking him at 7 because he got the official decision against Manny Pacquiao, and I think it was close enough of a fight that, as we discussed when that fight happened, the three of us agreed that, I thought Pacquiao won it, but I don't think that it was the ridiculous robbery that some people were screaming about. So I think Pacquiao at that time, despite his age, was still in the top. I think he was in the top 4. I think I had him in the top 4 at that point. So I felt like you had to give Horn some credit for the victory. That's why I've got him there. Now, that does fit a little bit of what you alluded to, Mike, the way you're making your analysis between Spence and Thurman. I just think Spence has still done enough to be ahead of Thurman, but sometimes on resume, you have to rank a guy ahead of somebody else, even when you think the other guy would win. For me, even though I may be in the minority in that, I think that Deontay Wilder would beat Anthony Joshua if they fight in the next year or so.
Has nothing to do with this. Plus the fact that Joshua is not going to beat anybody, or Wilder's not going to beat anybody that can fight. But we'll have that discussion here in another month when Luis Ortiz whips his ass. Let's go ahead and we'll go to the Robert Easter fight, which, once again, he had trouble with another one like he did Shafikov. Javier Fortuna was the one tonight, and Easter improved to 21-0 with the victory. I don't think the fight was a robbery. I know, John, you had him winning by a point. I actually had Fortuna winning by a point, but we never agree, so that's all right. So that'll tell you how close the fight was. But I just don't see any improvement at all, John, and I know you don't either.
No, the more I've watched boxing, the more I've lived life, I think what's helpful is when you adjust your analysis to what you see. And that sounds like real basic, but most people don't do it because of their biases or some belief they want to hang on to. And why I say that is I liked Robert Easter coming up. I thought he looked very, very good. Taking out a decent fighter in Mendez, a pretty good fighter, former contender, when the division was a bit weaker. And I thought then he looked kind of like a potential Paul Williams type of a fighter, but I have not seen any development since the Mendez fight at all. He's not punching with significant authority. He's not landing. And, he's a guy that tries. He's a guy that tries. I mean, I see effort in there. Sometimes you would get frustrated with a guy where you'd say, what's he doing? I don't see the effort. I mean, I see effort in there, but I just don't see development. And the eye test to me now, the more and more I see Robert Easter, is he just doesn't look to me to be quite as good as it looked he was going to be. And we've seen that for quite a few fights now. And what's really alarming is he's not stopping anybody. He's not hurting anybody. He's a tall lightweight, but he's not finding ways to really land with authority. I just thought kind of on want to and activity tonight, he did just enough to get enough rounds to edge Fortuna by a point. I think I could see a little bit of his gripe that Fortuna didn't make weight. Maybe that's a little unfair and takes away from his motivation. But the problem with that is Fortuna was a guy fighting at 130 pounds. And I don't think, again, with all these junior divisions we don't need, I don't think it's that he's at that much of a disadvantage that this was supposed to be at 135. But my point that's alarming to me is it tells me that Fortuna really probably was not in very good shape, because he'd been able to make 130 pounds and then he weighed at 136.8 or something like that. So it tells me that, Fortuna wasn't even in that good of a shape, and Easter, is not putting any hurt on him. He's going the distance with him. Just doesn't look good for Robert Easter against, Danny Garcia's been fighting on some PBC. So, if Danny Garcia wants to fight down at lightweight, 135 pounds after the Lipinets fight, usually guys don't go back down. That's rare. It would probably be if he struggled with Lipinets or something like that, which I don't think we see. But if that did happen, I mean, Lipinets is still a good fighter. But then maybe now you would look at it and maybe PBC and would say, well, Robert Easter's not that big of a risk for Danny Garcia, and we'll Robert get
You mean Mikey Garcia?
And Garcia's going to chop him up. Yes. I'm sorry if I said Danny.
Because I think Danny'd whip his ass too, though. I just don't know if Danny can get to 135.
Right. No, but Easter's 5'11". I mean, it's certainly realistic to think he'll be fighting as a welterweight before his career's over. We don't know at that point what his career may be, but that's
I hope not
a ridiculous thought. But with the power, with the lack of power he's showing, it won't be good for him. But I think it would be something we'll see sooner or later. But it's just I liked him a lot. Before the Mendez fight, he was knocking people out, looked great taking out Mendez, but it just hasn't happened. And it's been enough fights since that I just don't see the development there. I said on our show earlier in the week that since this was a PBC card and we're talking PBC, guys I thought who needed to make a statement with who they were in with, Robert Easter was one. He did not do that to me, and I think Danny Garcia has to do that against Brandon Rios. If he can't let his hands go against a Brandon Rios who's plodding forward and is defensively challenged, it's never going to happen. So out of those two guys, Robert Garcia did not complete his mission to me tonight.
All right. The big problem to me with Easter is, I mean, he's a tall guy, and Jeremiah, he doesn't seem to use his superior height or his reach to his advantage.
Well, and you know what he said before the fight? I need to use my height. And, he goes in the fight. And the thing that I find most frustrating is not just the fact that he doesn't know how to use his height properly. It's that he fights in that stupid Adrian Broner-esque defensive posture. It's like this goofy attempt at trying to mimic what Floyd Mayweather did, but it's just flat-footed and too basic where you come forward and you go backward. I mean, it's wholly unimpressive. I don't know what it was tonight. I just couldn't stand watching it. It was just so damn irritating because he's a tall guy, and so what he'll do, like Adrian Broner used to do. So Adrian Broner could do it effectively when he was at 130, 135 because his hands were so damn quick, and he was, fairly powerful at those divisions. But Easter, he'll come at you with his left arm low, and then he'll try to peck you with a straight right hand. And I'm just wondering to myself, what exactly are you accomplishing with that? Get your damn left hand up, throw the jab in front of it, blind the guy, and crack him. It's just that poking and prodding stuff. I mean, he still fights like Paul Williams, but Paul Williams, like the real poor man's like the bum Paul Williams version. It's just it's frustrating to watch because he's a real tall guy for lightweight. I mean, I generally like those kind of guys. Again, I'm a tall, lanky guy myself. I like to see it inside the ring. But when you're not utilizing, his style is just so hampered by that silly defensive posture. And I don't know what it is, but I just can't get over it.
Well, this fight would have ended up a split draw without what I thought was bullcrap point deduction in the second round also.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, but
one thing I think Jeremiah you might be seeing, because I know your point, and all the guys weren't afflicted with it. Like, you don't see that with Errol Spence now, but I saw him pick up his aggressiveness and get better at working the body as he got into his career, and a lot of these guys other developed. But what I'm getting to, and you look at a guy like Jamal Herring, we mentioned on the show earlier in the week. I think when the amateurs, they got rid of it, thank God. But when they went to that crazy, horrible scoring system where they were counting the punches, I think you saw a lot of even though we know all the countries were fighting under the same rules still, I think you saw a lot of the American guys where, the American amateurs, you go back 40 years and all the great fighters you had and the guys who could punch even at the amateur level and would be stopping people. Then you had this generation of American amateurs that were just, this, just like you're talking about, the pecking and the prodding with no leverage, the going, just going back and forth. And it just ruined a lot of guys in that generation, I think, of amateur boxing, that crazy scoring system that has been dumped. And I did even get to talk to a couple of American amateur coaches on the junior Olympic level, because the junior Olympics have been in Charleston, West Virginia, actually, most of the last few years. And they said the same thing, thank God we've gotten rid of that scoring system and we've got to really rebuild, to where we were, and that was one of the big problems. So I don't know, Easter, of course, was a decorated amateur for the Americans. And I think that I think that's one theory that might apply to a lot of this that we see.
Yeah, maybe. Right. And I'll go. No, go ahead.
I was going to go to commercial, but if you got something quick to say.
Okay, yeah, I was just going to say, you see a lot. You see that style embodied, especially with the Cubans, Guillermo Rigondeaux, Erislandy Lara. They are the ultimate peck and poke guys, and they're fighting like they have white marks on their gloves and they're scoring points. And it's irritating to see Americans do it, because there used to be, like you said, there used to be a time when these guys knew how to body punch, when they knew how to infight, and they would actually throw with pop. And again, back to Errol Spence, to his credit, he gets all those things correct. So let's go to commercial.
All right, guys, we're going to go check out a word from our sponsor, MyBookie.ag. You can go on to gruelingtruth.net, click the MyBookie.ag banner. It takes you right to Bet the Games tomorrow. So make sure you check that out. We'll be back after a minute.
Hey, everyone. My name is Alex Golden. I am the host of the Courtroom Podcast, an NBA debate show here at the Grueling Truth. And I'm here with one simple message. If you're watching the games, it's time to start making money. The Grueling Truth has partnered with MyBookie.ag, an industry-leading sportsbook website who reminds you that where you bet is just as important as who you're betting on. And that's why the Grueling Truth urges you to check out MyBookie.ag. In addition to the usual thousands of odds, money lines, proposition bets, and futures offered on MyBookie.ag daily, they also have in-game live betting and a mobile site that makes wagering on the go easier than ever. So join now, and MyBookie.ag will give you a 50% bonus on first deposit for up to $3,000 in extra playing money. Just enter promo code TGT50. That's TGT50 to take advantage of this offer. Visit MyBookie.ag, courtesy of the Grueling Truth Network, and enjoy winning today. MyBookie.ag. You play, you win, you get paid.
All right, guys, we're back on the live version of Inside Boxing Weekly after the Spence-Peterson card. Next up, we're going to talk about something me and John agree completely with, and that is Marcus Brown. John, he did what he was supposed to do.
Yep, Mike, we've agreed on Marcus Brown. He did exactly what he's supposed to do. That's what I like with Brown. He only had one rough fight with Kalajic, and I did say that afterwards it was a hunch, and I think my hunch proved to be right there, that Kalajic does only have that one controversial loss to Brown. I did think Brown pulled that fight out, but Brown was in bad trouble in that fight and really struggled. But Kalajic is just that good as well. He just hasn't, we talk about guys not getting fights. He hasn't been getting many fights. I think maybe he's had one fight since the Marcus Brown fight that he won by KO, but that's it. Last time I checked, BoxRec. But, Marcus Brown in every other fight has really been impressive. And, of course, if Kalajic does turn out to be that good, then that will have been the testing ground for Marcus Brown. But in light heavyweight, which is my favorite division in boxing right now, I actually do think it's the best division in boxing right now, top to bottom. I think Marcus Brown is right there as one of those formidable guys, and I think he's been ready to get the shot at a bigger name, and I think that those names have not wanted to get in with him. So if he can, I would pick him over Adonis Stevenson right now if he were able to get Stevenson in the ring right there. I'd pick him over. Certainly, I think he'd take Badu Jack out as well. But he's not getting those guys, so it's going to be a question of who can PBC get in with Marcus Brown, and let Marcus Brown show that he can beat one of the tough top 10 light heavyweights and then be right there with the biggest names in the division.
All right, Jeremiah, thoughts on Marcus Brown?
Well, I think he looked pretty damn impressive tonight. I mean, I thought Natutu was going to hang in there and give him some rounds. I thought but that didn't happen to be the case. I mean, Brown just showed a lot of speed. He showed good power. I mean, he just looked classy in there. I mean, he put everything together real well. And I was impressed. I mean, again, Natutu was a good fighter. You could see early on that he was a good fighter. I mean, he was doing nice little things like, he was trying to take away the jab with, good hand placement. And, his right hand looked quick. It didn't look powerful, but it did look quick. And, he's popping it off and moving his head from time to time. But Brown figured him out pretty quickly and got him out of there. And I'm looking forward to seeing him fight the very best in the division. And though I like what I see out of Brown, I still don't think he competes with the very best in the class. I just don't think his chin's going to stand up to those big right-hand punchers. But, again, like as always, we got to see him fight. But kudos to him. It's a good win.
All right. Next up, we had Adam Konacki. Of course, everybody on Showtime said it differently. But Konacki, 20 pounds heavier than he was his last outing, which was his career best win over Arthur Spilka. Kaladze, who was 26-2 with 18 knockouts. Freddie Roach was training him at the Wild Card Gym in L.A. And also, speaking of that, Freddie Roach will be on the show here within the next week or two also, so make sure you keep an eye out for that. But this is a fight that, at the start, Jeremiah, Konacki, who, let's face it, he's a fat ass, was getting smacked around by Kaladze. But the guy who looks in better shape, by the third round, looked like he was totally done.
Yeah, he did, and I know we've talked about this on the show about how Konacki, his work rate's pretty good for a big guy, and
whoa, he's a fat guy.
For a fat guy, yeah, for a fat guy, yeah, okay.
That's like saying that you're going out with a big bone girl and she's 5'5" and weighs 240. She's fat. She's fat.
I've never bought the big bone thing, so that's all just a nice way of saying you're fat. But no, the thing about Konacki is I was real disappointed in his weight. I was hoping he would come in about the same weight that he was with Spilka, but what he tried to do, I was excited initially because what he was trying to do is he was just trying to get Kaladze out of there. He came out, he started throwing bombs, but he was sloppy. I mean, he's got little head movement. He wasn't working behind the jab as much as he should have. He just came out and tried to bomb him out. And, it was to his detriment for, time and time again. I mean, Kaladze was counterpunching pretty nicely in there. And I really liked what was surprising to me is that Kaladze was banging the bodies quite often. I mean, he kept throwing that right hook and banging him downstairs, but Konacki, I don't know if the fight would have went longer. Maybe it would have helped wear him down, but Konacki kept taking him. He kept taking the headshots, and he just kept banging away, and eventually got him out of there. And during the telecast, we heard that Freddie Roach was saying good things about Kaladze, and you saw some skill. It's not as if the guy was a no-hoper. I mean, he made the fight competitive.
Yeah, I thought Konacki was impressive, except for the physical condition, which I know he went 6 rounds. Maybe he can go 12 rounds like that. But, John, to me, when I see a guy like that, it just tells me that he's not training that hard.
Yeah, I agree with what you and Jeremiah said. Konacki, the way he looked at his weight against Spielka, for him to come in 20 pounds heavier, he's just pushing it. I did compare him.
He's a B cup.
They look exactly the same, and they do exactly the same things. But to Jarrell Miller, because both the odd package, just in the sense that both the odd package of big, heavy guys who throw a ton of punches for a heavyweight and they come forward and they come after you. I think Miller's better than Konachki, but they both are guys who, in a heavyweight division that is still not as good as I think a lot of people want to make it out to be. Is it better than the recent Klitschko era? Yeah, I agree with that. And I was with everybody else, about 2 years ago, seeing a lot of potential coming, but through various events, with Fury, Ortiz, Povetkin, it just hasn't panned out. But why I'm mentioning all that is I still think we need guys like Miller and Konachki to make a run to really give us a full-fledged, no pun intended with these two, to give us a full-fledged heavyweight top 10, a filled-out heavyweight top 10. But, we'd like to see. Yeah, they
well, I'll tell you this. If one of them wins a heavyweight title in the shape they're in, it'll tell you the shape that the heavyweight division is in.
Well, I mean, we think, and George Foreman was always, even though he was even heavier.
But see, there's a difference. George Foreman was solid, even when he weighed 260. His belly was solid. He didn't have like flaps of skin hanging over, and his tits weren't huge.
But one thing he did say, though, I was going to say that even though George, went up in weight in his older comeback, he was always, when you listen to him as a commentator, or of course he's been on your show, but when you see him interviewed, he would say that he's always a big believer that a 215-pound heavyweight, and I think George knows what he's talking about there. Who's just a really good athlete and can do a lot of things, can be as good as anybody, even in this era. And, when Tyson was at his very best, at his size, when you look what he did to people, he showed a little bit of that. And I think Evander Holyfield did too, when he was at his best. So even in this era, it may seem like it can't happen again, but guys like George might have a point there. And why I mention that when we're talking about Konachki and Miller is because if that is true, that's the antithesis of Konachki and Miller, who are just guys that can do some things but are just piling on the weight. But Miller reminds me more of the older George Foreman, even though he's not an old guy, just with what the package he brings. So I don't know. He may still get by. I mean, he bludgeoned down Walk. I'd like to see who we're going to get him to fight next. I thought with TV-type things, maybe he could get Joseph Parker, but Anthony Joshua's got that snapped up now. So there's not many heavyweights available for HBO to make him fight. And then, Konachki's fighting with PBC. So that's, some Showtime stuff, but it's with the PBC guys. PBC itself does not really have a lot of heavyweights. They've got Deontay Wilder, and then the other guys, the jury's kind of still out on, so to speak. So, sometimes the politics, it's hard to see who these guys get matched up with.
Well, the jury's still out on Wilder also.
It's out on all. The jury's still out on all these heavyweights. I mean, it's just an era of where the jury is still out, and this is why a lot of new fans get upset. When we're like, no, these guys are not all-time great, et cetera, because they're not fighting the competition. It's just different. But I do believe PBC has Brazil. I would like to see, in my opinion, I would like to see Brazil versus Miller. Oh, and I know it's not going to happen, but I think Konachki versus Brazil, or Konachki versus Miller, or Brazil versus Miller. I think any three of those fight, any way you would pair those guys, I would think would make damn good fights. But with Miller and with Konachki, I just don't think you win a heavyweight championship like that. I just think they're too far out of shape, and really the heavyweight division. Actually, Showtime was talking about that too, because they were talking to Sean Porter, who was a terrible commentator in my opinion. He was awful. But they were talking about, before they talked about the welterweight division and how they thought it was the best in boxing, and I don't agree with that. And I think outside the top five, welterweight's not that special either. But they were talking about the heavyweight division and a renaissance. And I was thinking of that word, like a renaissance from. You look at the top 10 of the heavyweights, and as you alluded to, John, you look at Luis Ortiz, who's probably 47, 48 years old. I talked about that, and Rick Glazer said that he's talked to people who know that he's older than he is. Talk about Povetkin, who's old as well. And, so you have Joshua, who the jury's still out on, Wilder, who's still, the jury's still out on, and then Povetkin and Ortiz, and then Parker, and then you have Brazil, you have Konaki, you have Dillian White, you have Kubrat Pulev, you have Andy Ruiz Jr. The division's pretty damn bad. I mean, even if you get Tyson Fury back, the division's still pretty damn bad.
I just think they're comparing it to how bad it was 5-6 years ago.
I don't even think it's that much better, to be honest with you. I mean, if Povetkin and Ortiz were not, doing stupid stuff and Fury was active, I might agree. But in the state, okay, so what we thought
Remember,
there was,
Showtime's got a ton of money tied up in these heavyweights, so they've got to say that.
Yeah, they're all company guys, but people I think saw a sort of new horizon, when we had Joshua Wilder, Fury, even Klitschko before he was officially retired, Povetkin, who I think is a very good heavyweight, Ortiz, who was, damn good before, he just hasn't looked as good lately, but I think we saw a sort of, again, a new horizon, and we're like, oh, it's looking brighter. Then Fury goes off and, does lines of coke and gets in trouble and, retires. And then Povetkin and Ortiz get popped for peds. And then you have Joseph Parker, who, is about the only clean athlete. In terms of clean athletes, he's probably, the third best fighter in the world. It looked good, but at the state it's in now, it's pretty damn bad. The state it's in right now, I don't think it's much better than, even the worst of eras, with Klitschko ruling.
Jeremiah made a good point, though, about I think PBC might, they could do Brazil and Konachki for a fun fight. That would be a test. But I agree that the division, I agree with Jeremiah's analysis right there. I just think this was a division that looked like it might be on the upswing compared to where it was 2 years ago. But it just for all those reasons that Jeremiah, articulated well there, it just hasn't panned out that way right now. And there's just not enough top 10 versus top 10 matchups to see where everybody is for sure. And, I thought a lot of people were kind of misanalyzing Spence and Peterson going in. And I think that despite the fact you can argue by default, Joseph Parker is a top 3 heavyweight. Now you could go that far, but I don't think he's got anything at all for Anthony Joshua. I think he's why has anybody watched Parker fight and watched Parker's recent fights?
I don't know what you said, John. You were cutting out really bad there.
Okay, I was just saying that I think you talk about some fights that some people misanalyze. I think some were misanalyzing Spence and Peterson going in. And I think that Joseph Parker and Anthony Joshua is another one, while Joseph Parker could even be argued to be a top 3 heavyweight by default right now. If you've watched any of his recent fights, he's got nothing for Anthony Joshua, and that's a blowout.
Well, and another... I was just going to say with it. Yeah, I was going to say with the heavyweight division too. It's the other thing too is with this whole New Horizon thing. What you need is new blood filling in place of the people who are on their way out. Ortiz, if Ortiz gets blown out, his career's done. If Povetkin gets blown out anytime soon, his career is done. Those two are talented guys at their best, real talented guys at their best. But they're just about done. So what you need is new blood filling in, and you look at the landscape and you ask yourself, who is a potential star there? I mean, you look at Tony Yoka, he looks good. Yeah, I don't know. I just haven't seen enough from any of these guys.
He's fighting a 10-rounder in his next fight.
Well,
straight from 4 to 10 rounds. Well, it's the heavyweight division. It's not like it's real risky.
Yeah, I know.
I'm not going to count out Miller yet either. I'd like to see him in a little bit better shape, but he has shown me enough that I still think he's an X factor that could come on. It's not a certainty when he's weighing in at fights 293 pounds, but he brings enough of a unique package that I'm not going to count him out yet either.
Yeah, because he's more talented than probably everybody that holds a heavyweight belt right now.
The upside is there. We can at least look at it that way. The upside is there, especially in a way when you look at it that he didn't have the amateur background. So there could, in theory, be some room to improve. Now he doesn't have the same basic fundamentals. It doesn't mean that it's an advantage to not have an amateur background. But when you analyze talent, and you can do this in other sports too, sometimes a guy that was a late starter who's looking real good might have more upside because he didn't even have to learn when he was younger.
Right. Jeremiah, anything to add?
Yeah, anything to add to the division? No, not really. I mean, you look at, again, that's part of what makes some of the other divisions intriguing. Like the welterweight division. There's a number of prospects coming up that you think to yourself like, oh, this guy might be able to make a splash. But you look at the heavyweight division, I don't see that. I mean, I see guys like. Who did I write on not long ago? Alexander Teslenko. He's 25. He looks about the best prospect that I've seen so far. You look at Nathan Gorman, who Ricky Hatton trains. He reminds me a little bit of Andy Ruiz, where he's got real good hand speed for a heavyweight. But his body type doesn't translate into success. You got Simon Keane, who I believe was he was an Olympian. I know he had a solid amateur background. Haven't really seen anything special out of him. He's 29 years old. Adrian Granat, who I believe is undefeated. He's a Swedish heavyweight. Haven't seen anything special there. Who else do we have? Oscar Rivas. He had a good amateur. I believe he was an Olympian as well. I actually like what I see in him in terms of overall ability. But he's also 30 years old, and I just haven't seen the it factor. I haven't seen that abstract it. And then you have Sergey Kuzmin, who I also wrote about. He's 30 years old. He doesn't really have the body type to, that's going to translate into success. I do think he's a crafty guy. He had a long amateur background as well. I had him beating Amir Mansour, in the short time that they were together, and I think that speaks well of him. But I really don't see anything there where I'm thinking about. Even Tony Yoka. I've seen everything Tony Yoka has been in so far, and he's shown improvement. But there's still some concern there. Who's the British guy who's coming up as well? I think. No. The other one.
There is no other one. It's Double D.
No, there is. I'm trying to. I think he fought like an 8-rounder in his first professional bout, or maybe it was a 10-rounder. I know it was something that you it's not often that you see. Ah, damn it. I know he's kind of gotten a late start to it as well. And actually, Sergey Kuzmin stopped him in the amateurs. So, was it Joe Joyce? Joe Joyce is the guy that I'm thinking of. Either one of you heard of him?
I'm not familiar with him.
Me neither.
Okay, so yes. Yeah, so Joe Joyce is another guy that Great Britain is trying to hype as a potential contender in the future as well. Of course, the British team is doing pretty good, but from what I saw Joyce in the amateurs, I've got some David Price chin concerns there. And not only that, he's 32 years old, but yeah, he took on he was in a 10-rounder in his first fight. And he's 6'6", and that's another guy that the Brits are trying to get behind. But again, I look at all these guys, and I don't really see anything special. That's why I'm rooting for the cruiserweights to come up and make a lasting imprint, because the up and comers for the heavyweights they're not doing it for me.
All right, guys.
We'll have to see what happens with Gassiev, Dorticos, and Usyk. Whoever emerges out of that. And Gassiev's young enough that even if he were to pick up a loss to Dorticos or Usyk, and I'm assuming Usyk's going to handle Breedis, that he could still make some noise anyway at heavyweight. He's got a lot of time left, as long as he doesn't take too much punishment. So, yeah, I would think that those hopes might be, and Dorticos is not much of an underdog. It's almost even money against Gassiev, so it's not impossible. He could even be the guy. But I think that those three guys are better than a lot of the heavyweight prospects we're seeing right now.
All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap the show up for this week. We will be back on, what day did we say, guys? Tuesday Night Live?
Yeah.
So Tuesday night at 10 o'clock, we'll be live on thegrillingtruth.net for our Inside Boxing Weekly show. We'll break down all the fights next weekend. Make sure you check out our Legends of Boxing show, which in the past we've had George Foreman, Larry Holmes, had Reggie Johnson the other day, which isn't up yet, but will be shortly. Former lightweight champion Sean O'Grady was on the show, so make sure you go to thegrillingtruth.net, check out all of the shows. Tomorrow night, after the last conference championship game, which I believe is Philadelphia, Minnesota, we will be live again. Me, Matt Andruscavage, Brian Schmidt, former Denver Bronco, Mark Cooper, to break down the championship games. So make sure you join us tomorrow night on thegrillingtruth.net, probably 15, 20 minutes after the final game ends. You can hear all of our shows on iHeart, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher. Wherever you find sports podcasts, you'll find The Grueling Truth. So for Jeremiah Preisser, John Einreinhofer, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.